Mm.
About their dreams. They're Black, Latino, Asian, but about their dreams. And these are kids from Watts, Compton, South Central, Hawthorne, you name it, and really talk about their dreams and then photograph them. And it was part of a project with the Saul Price Center for Social Change there at USC. The work I do manifests itself like that sometimes. Leah is very familiar with the work that I do with our mutual kind of cousin, brother, or whatever you want to call it, around theater, and I used to run a ministry at the Central City Lutheran Mission in San Bernardino on 13th and G. We had these young people. There was a summer where there was just massive killings of young people for really, senseless things. A kid died over, Trayvell Williams died over a cell phone. Another kid, Mynesha Clark, was shot, just a random bullet coming into her apartment building. And in San Bernardino, we were really trying to figure out what was going on. So at a ministry called Faith First, there were a number of kids there who were doing this dance style called crunk dancing or getting buck. And I brought Kirby Hines, who's now the head of theater and film at UCR, into the space to witness these young people. And out of that was birthed a play called Buck World One, which really kind of looks at the macro, like the universe, and then the earth, and then country and nationalism, and then down to community, and then down to the issue of family and the issues of fratricide and violence, where it comes from, and the notion of how we could be redemptive in that work. And the best part of the work was not just the play, but it was the fact of taking these 30 young people from a community in San Bernardino, which is often glossed over, forgotten, pushed aside, and to watch them take this play around the United States of America, to watch them be in a place like the Oregon Shakespeare Festival and be accepted as thespians with the other group, to watch them in New York City off Broadway, and these kids being able to see how art and faith and history could change not only their life, but the impact that they can have on the world by telling their story. Okay. And I throw those two out there because sometimes as a historian, somebody thinks that it's just this manifestation of dates and times and chronologies, but it's really about, for me, how you use these stories to affect today and the future so that history becomes instructive. Because when I was really young, someone once told me that if humans have done it, then humans can do it. If humans have done it, then humans can do it. And I grew up in a little place, Fontana, California, and I think it's important for the context of right now. Fontana was known as the center of the Ku Klux Klan in the 70s and 80s in California. Literally, the guy who was the head of the Klan, his name was George Pepper, and his house shared the backyard with my girlfriend, Shanta Wade's house.
Wow.
We grew up I always tell people there's a trip because it wasn't the 1940s or the 1950s. I was in Southern California in the middle of the 1980s with, Michael Jackson with the #1 album in Thriller, and Klan marches down Sierra Boulevard as part of my existence.
Wow.
And racial violence. And when I say racial violence, in 1984 in October, a great friend of mine, his name is Cezanne Davis, was beaten within an inch of his life by 3 individuals who we all knew. Yeah. And he's paralyzed from the neck down to this day because of that. When I was in 8th grade, a guy named DeVard Howard, who happens to be still alive today, was a telephone line worker, and a Klansman shot him while he was on the telephone line. He's still alive today, but paralyzed from the neck down also.
Wow. What year again?
DeVard Howard would be 81.
81.
And Cezanne Davis, 84. So, and I'm saying that because, there's this notion of the redemptive power of art, culture, history, faith. And then there's this reality that for many of us is not just esoteric and kind of, what is race or what is racism? But I grew up seeing it, and Leah knows what I'm talking about because we grew up, it was the visceral expression of racism. You know what I mean? The kind that we generally think only happens in Arkansas or Mississippi or Alabama. But I was experiencing that in Southern California, 60 miles east of Los Angeles, California. Do you guys get me? Yeah. And trying to figure out what's real, right? Do you know what I mean? Like all that. And I say that because I assume a number of young people right now are in that same kind of space where they feel like, prior to, let's say, the beginning of 2020, they saw a world that seemed to be moving towards inclusion. If for most of your young people, they go to the prom and nobody worries about what the race of their date is in Southern California. You guys know your kids go to the prom, a Latino girl's going with an African-American guy, a white girl's going with a Asian guy, people who are LGBTQ are going, and they're just, they're just a different world. Somebody's got to mute themselves. but they're just in a different world. And then all of a sudden, they have to be faced with, because of George Floyd, the realization that systemic racism still exists, that everything is not P.T. King, Southern California, blue state, kind of, kumbaya. And then their question is, do I want this to be the reality for my children? And what I think these young people have said is they don't want that to be that reality. And they have taken to the streets and to boardrooms of corporations and to the administration of institutions and to all kinds of other things to say, no more. That's it. I'm done. And I think for many of us in a different generation, we see the change. I'll just give you a quick example. They changed Aunt Jemima. I mean, they're changing, I know some people think these are superficial. It's just an image on a pancake syrup. But when you know the history of those things and every day you have to see those things, or in Mississippi, when they took down the Confederate flag, those things, I think for some young people, it's been like an awakening of those things. And that's why history has been so important for them. That's why they're tearing down monuments. That's why they're engaging the question of history. That's why they're seeking for every institution and even the church, that they're seeking, what is the root of this place? Where did it come from? They're asking questions like, why do I go to a church where only people who look like me go to this church? And there's another church across the street and only people who look another way go to that church. And why is that the case? I know we have a few examples. Your church is one of the shining examples, but you guys know Malcolm X said the most segregated hour in American life is 11 o'clock Sunday morning, right? Yeah. These young people are saying the world that they exist in, they want to make the world that we all exist in. And that's a world where they respect one another, where they stand up for one another. One of the most beautiful parts about these protests have been the multicultural nature of them. And I don't just mean the kind of like kumbaya and multicultural nature. I mean the change must happen nature, that I go to some of these protests and it's hard to find a Black person. I mean, I'm looking for, which makes me feel so good that someone has said this is a human problem.
Daniel, can I ask a question?
Yes.
I want to welcome Greg Wade,
yes.
who I've recently come into his acquaintance. He's friends with Pete, and Greg is city manager for Solana Beach. And we welcome you, Greg. Thanks for taking some time while on vacation. Good to have you. So my question, if I could just stop you for a minute.
Yeah.
Do you think that the change is and I know we're people of faith and we always have hope.
Yeah.
Pete and I were talking last night. This conversation has been going on for more than 400 years, right?
Yes.
This progression from the times our people came over on the slave ships, through the Civil War, through peonage, through civil rights, through Jim Crow. We've been in this dialogue for a long, long time. And the thing I was saying to Pete, that this is a process, but I'm curious from your understanding, from your point of view, from your intellect. Do you think we can move the needle? Do you think? Is there hope for any real change? Because in the midst of this, now we have this white base that is almost fighting this, right? We were talking yesterday, Pete and I, about the word that's being used now is cancel culture. Well, you're trying to cancel culture. You're trying to pull down our leaders and so forth. And so, do you think we can move the needle? Can we really do anything?
Yep, I think we can. Well, here's one thing. In all of our other struggles, it's been about the expressions of racism. So slavery is an expression of racism, so we fought to end slavery. Segregation is an expression of racism, so we sought to end segregation. This is the first time where we have sought to end the source. We're actually going in and trying to attack the source, which means, and this is why I think some people are so visceral in their reactions right now, because we're getting to the soul issues.
What's the source, Daniel? What's the source? Come on.
Evil. You know, racism is an evil. It is, you know, the Bible talks about we wrestle not against flesh and blood, right? Mm-hmm. And this notion that we've thought the expressions are the flesh and blood, the policies that we've tried to change. Right. And now the real issue is to get at the source. And I think that when you see people so violently opposed to, let's say, talking about wearing a face mask to cover yourself to care for other people, and yet not violently oppressed or moved about a man being killed in the street by a sworn officer of the law who sits there on this guy's neck for 8 minutes and 46 seconds. That's where you see the difference in the expression, and you say that someone cares more about, in essence, this, but not humanity, not people, not God's children. And that's where we get at the root level. And that's why you see these even generational battles between parents and their children. And the children are saying, I'm not going to live that way. There's certain things you cannot unlearn. I saw a little white girl. She must have been 5. She's at this protest I'm at. She has this BLM, poster, and she's standing there and she's indignant. You mean, this little girl had this look in her face, which is, don't mess with me. She can't unlearn that. That young girl, no matter what the motivations of her parents were, maybe they weren't even as gung-ho about this as she is. Maybe they just were being politically correct and going to a rally. But this young girl is going to be the person, even in her elementary school, who, when she sees expressions of that happen, say stop. And when she grows up, she's going to be the person who's going to be on that other end. So I think at the core, what we are seeing, and that's why we're being led by these young people. He said a child will lead them. They are the ones pushing us. They are talking about their world. I think this is the first time that we're going to actually have some movement about the vestiges and the issue of institutional racism. And that's why they're questioning. I can't sit here at this institution and have the name of Confederate general hanging over me every day, reminding me of what used to be, and in essence saying that it still is. So I think that this is one of the very different times. That's why it is so different. I was listening to a conversation with Angela Davis the other day, and she, who has been through and seen these struggles and been in the midst, she was just like, it's the most different thing that she has ever seen. Wow. And she was saying, this is a person who's been through all the struggles, Black Power, civil rights, womanism, everything else. And she was saying, it's the first time that I think that this is really going to have some change. Now, once again, and I don't want to doubt God or doubt these young people and say things like it will never change or it's going to dissipate. I'm not going to throw those words into the universe because I don't want that to happen. And I think we speak things into being. And so I don't ever speak about what they can't do and what can't happen and change, because I've seen things change in my lifetime just in the last 3 months that these young people have done that I just can't imagine. Yeah. So
let me ask you, what would you say? So I've got Ariana, who's a member of our church, one of our young people. I've got my granddaughters, Tamara. I've got young Stanley over here. And every adult on here has Bo has 5 kids, 6 kids, 7 kids. I don't know, something like that. I don't know. But so we have these parents, we've got these grandparents, we've got these adults that have relationship with this generation that's coming up. What do you say to them? as they prepare, Ari's getting ready to be a freshman. Where are you going, Ariana? What high school are you getting ready to go to?
Vista, Marietta.
So Ari's getting ready to go to Vista Marietta. Samara is going to an athletes program. What do you say to Mr. Stanley, young Stanley? I see your fam. I don't see your face. I kind of want to know where you're getting ready, what grade you're getting ready to go into. But Daniel and Ari and Samara and Mr. Stanley, you have an opportunity to hear from a university professor, a personal friend, but someone who's in this discussion very, very heavily. And so I really want you to think about what you might want to ask him, and that's why he's here. Young Stanley, give me your first name, son.
Me? Zion.
Zion?
Yes, sir.
And what grade are you going to, son?
The 9th.
To the 9th grade. So we got 3 high school freshmen, right? And that excites me. I just get excited when I think about, okay, we've got these young people getting ready to go onto the high school campus and are very diverse. I know Vista Marietta, diverse. What school do you go to, Zion?
West Lawrence High School.
And is it a diverse, culturally diverse high school?
Yes, sir.
Yeah. Predominantly white, can I assume that?
Yes.
Yes.
Yeah, okay. So here we have these African-American students, and I've got a teacher, Latalia, who teaches 8th grade. Is that right, Latalia?
No. 9 through 12.
High school. Yeah.
She said,
No, not middle school. That's real work. That's real work right there. No, she's going into high school, and so she's a teacher, 27 years old. She and I are very close in age, and so it's I didn't really need that comedy, that laugh. I didn't really need that. But what do you say to them? What do you say to these young people, and even to these parents that have these young people that are getting ready to go into this environment? And it has the potential of being rather hostile, because we know that some of our young people come from homes that are trying to maintain the status quo. And so the potential, we have the potential of real conflict on the high school campus. I mean, that's real, right? Talk to them, please.
all right, well, 2 things. So number one, I think with your last point, there's another wave coming, and that's the wave when kids go back to school, because all this has been happening with them out of school. So when you talk about 3,000 young people on a high school campus up and down America, and you talk about 15 and 20 and 30,000 young people at college campuses, there's about to be another wave that's going on with these people saying, now it's my turn to make my say. So that's number one. So be ready for that. First off, for parents, listen. Did you hear what I just said? Listen. Listen to them. I know it's hard to, sometimes we want to judge and we want to tell them how we did it, and we want to, it's about listening right now. It's about listening. My daughter was talking to me, and initially when some of the protests turned violent, and she was saying to me, but I understand, Daddy, and I'm going, but honey, you can't, and I'm going through all this stuff. And then, I just stopped and started listening. And then, I didn't come around to her point, but I understood where she was saying that passivity
Didn't work.
Sorry. I don't know. Am I still there? All right. So I got to put this thing on do not disturb. That's what I should have done. All right. So, so sorry about this. Let me actually build away. But the notion being that here comes this reality, and I was being very closed off about listening to her. And then she said to me, Daddy, I'm really surprised at you. She said, you're always talking about progressive stuff or whatever else, and you seem very closed-minded right now.
Mm.
Oh, hey.
Mm.
Oh. And she said, look, she said, sometimes you're just sick and tired of it, and they won't listen because you've tried to be nonviolent. She said, but they killed Martin Luther King, and she went down the line. She's my daughter. She knows a little bit of history. And she went down the line. And she was like, so they don't listen to that. All I could do was, and I started going to the protest with her and just being quiet and not projecting Dr. Daniel Walker into their protest, but listening to them. So one is listen. Number two, support. It may not look like you. There may be times when you're afraid. That's where, you know, initially I'm like, she's going to these protests and this stuff is going on, so I'm afraid. So support was going with her. You know, and just, she wants to go. I'm worried about her safety, so I'm going to go and I'm going to be there with her. And guess what I saw? So many other parents going there with their kids too, and then learning because we were there with our kids. So it's listen, support, and for young people, you still got to get you still have to get your message out. And so I would say keep moving towards it. And whatever it looks like on your school campus or in your community, because that's the beautiful thing about what's going on. It's very non-linear in terms of the leadership model, right? We in our generation are very used to Martin Luther King, and under him was Ralph Abernathy, and under him was such and such, and there's a meeting and there's an agenda. And right now most of our generation are all messed up because we don't know where the meeting is. and we don't know what the agenda is, right. And we don't know what the things are, but it's this decentralized leadership model that's built on so that if they take out one person, the movement doesn't stop. All right. So we have to understand why that is. And it may seem very odd to us, but young people, you still got to get your voice heard. You know, push. Don't sit there and let this opportunity pass you by if you feel it in your heart. One of the greatest things that's been going on now because of the protest is that people who've been silenced even 3 months ago are being able to stand up and say, I had a beef with this a year ago, but nobody listened, or they told me to be quiet and it's going to all take, or they just chose not to speak up because they didn't want to deal with any repercussions. And now what they're feeling is that somebody's behind me. And so now that math teacher who used to talk a certain way to us and keep us over there, now this young person is going to stand up and say, I'm tired of that. And something needs to happen. And what do we need to do as parents? Stand right there with them. Because we know what's been going on. You guys know what I'm talking about. Yeah. Push out, pushing our kids out, special education, suspensions, all the rest of these types of things. And some of us, and don't take this personal, anybody, but we move into these multiracial communities where our kids are isolated as very few of the African Americans on campus. And then in their attempt to simply just talk about and express their Blackness, we have at times silenced them about that and told them it's a good school. Stop saying that kind of stuff. It's better than the school I grew up in. Y'all get where I'm coming from? Yeah. And don't let none of us who grew up in South Central or East Oakland, I had drive-bys in front of my house, and what we're doing is we're not listening to them because theirs is qualitatively different than ours. And I'm saying we gotta support them. Yeah. So young people, speak your truth, speak up, because this might be the time that you actually get that instructor who needs some act right done. Yeah. And there's policies in those school boards that have been demonizing and ostracizing and singling out these kids for years. Yeah. And so parent, that means stand up, be at that school board meeting with them, share your wisdom about the structures. Yeah. Meaning, this is how you attack this. This is who the superintendent is. This is when the meetings happen. Share your wisdom about that, but get out their way.
Which also means, and I'm going to speak to these young people for a minute, which also means you guys have to educate yourself. You really have to know your history. And I'm kind of history teacher here, right? You've got to know your history. Do not be apathetic towards who you are as a Black young person, as a Black male, a Black female. You have to know your history. And so I want to pause this for a moment. And again, I'm grateful to have all of you on this call. But Daniel, maybe there are some questions. Again, I've got teachers, I've got civil city administrators, I've got retired law enforcement, I have coaches, I've got parents. What questions do you all have for Daniel that you want to ask? And so let me open up, give you a few seconds. And young people, Samara, I've already told you I want to hear your voice. Ari, you guys gave good insight last week. Zion, really grateful to have you. Not sure who Tanisha is, or Jones, or Croatians, but you guys are welcome. So ask a question, go.
Come on, y'all.
Hey, John, you know I can't stop. And any young person who wants to cut me off, just cut me off. All right.
Oh,
Just say, hey, Pete, close your mouth. Just say, close your mouth, or whatever words you want to use. So, quick question. I didn't realize how much I didn't know about American history, and so. And I was also interested in, okay, what's the 60 years old, young, or a little older than my brother John Wells, but we're a couple months apart.
He doesn't want you to say that again. Just know that he doesn't want you to say that again.
So 60 years old, and so Ben's been through a few things, and I want to know what the current words and dialogue are, the current nomenclature, the vocabulary. And so I find Kendi, and I read this, and then I realized that this was 2019, and then I realized that he did a whole history published in 2016, which is really rich and really deep and really rigorous reading and study. And I'm a couple hundred pages into it, but I'm learning about our founding fathers, right? Yeah. I'm learning about our founding fathers and mothers, for that matter. And then I think John introduced me to D'Angelo and White Fragility, and I still thank him for that, because that pokes. That's going to poke a lot of white people if they're paying attention. But I realized that it's not your job, doctor.
Yeah.
Is that right, doctor? It's not your job, doctor, to necessarily teach me anything. I think D'Angelo, I listened to her this morning, and she had a good comment, and that was that if I don't know what to do, then then I really am not paying attention, and maybe I need to do my homework to figure out what to do. But just a quick question, if you would be so kind. Is this doing my homework a decent track to be going down right now?
Yes. And I'll beg to differ with you on one thing. It is my job to teach. So, it is my job to teach. It is my job to teach. I can't assume people knowing everything. I can't. It has, and remember, that teaching is not just for whites, it's for African Americans too. I mean, it's for Latinos, it's for Asians. Lots of us don't know our history. And the reason we don't know our history is because history is put together in a nice little bow. The narrative of any textbook that's written in history is always the same, which is there's a little conflict, but by the end of the chapter, everything is sewn back up together again. So if you have a chapter about women's rights, it's like sewn back together. And it always makes you walk away thinking, and that then was solved, right? That's the nature of a textbook, that was solved. In essence, that everything is solved in this ethos of Americana. And the reality is that so many times we haven't solved them. And the other part is we haven't even scratched the surface of really talking about what history is, because we've chosen to give one limited view of many of the historical actors. So I'm just finishing this piece I'm doing for a corporation about language and about new language. So I'll give you a case in point. I've told few people about this. Like, I tell people, don't use the word slave. And they're like, well, but they were slaves. They were slaves. I say, no, use the word enslaved. And they're like, well, what's the difference? I say, because slave, when you say that somebody is a slave, you are acting as if God made them that way. That those, and the word slave, or that entity, a slave, doesn't have feelings, doesn't have thoughts, doesn't have a family, doesn't have, it's slave. It becomes this monolith of blah, whatever that is. And the difference, they said, well, what other words should I use? I said, humans, people, mothers, fathers, sisters, brothers, teachers, doctors. So now when you say that humans and people were enslaved, and we use that word, that there was a historical process that happened to them, then the other question is, so who is the enslaver? And that then says, like in one of these pieces that I just wrote about this, it's like to say this about George Washington. You know, George Washington was a land-owning, was a human trafficker who also did great things in the Revolutionary War that merited him becoming elected the president of the United States of America. That's not canceling who George Washington is. That is giving a fuller view of who he is versus saying something like an influential planter in Virginia in the 1700s, comma, George Washington became the president of the United States of America. It's saying who he is. It does not take away from his military prowess. It doesn't take away from the fact that he became the president because of that. It doesn't take away his negotiation skills with England and whatever else. It doesn't take away any of those things. But it qualifies it by also putting this other thing that he's a human trafficker. And now you as a young person or you as an older person have to engage that moniker human trafficker.
Wow. Wow.
And ask yourself that question. Because remember, we're all multifaceted individuals, right? None of us is a monolith. And so any depiction of someone in a flat kind of way, it robs us all. I get so many white students in my class who will say something like I do this whole lecture about, you know, racial violence and lynchings, right? Because we're talking about, when we're talking about history and we're talking about Jim Crow, I talk about it. And we talk about things like the Tulsa Race Massacre and in 1921. And I have white students come to me and they're so upset. And they say, Dr. Walker, I didn't know about this. I didn't know people did this to other people. I didn't know this happened. And they feel that they've been cheated in their K through 12 education because they came away from good schools and good neighborhoods in affluent areas and were never taught their true history. And so it expands their ability to be human because they now have the knowledge of what happened. Because other than that, like in America before 9/11, when we would say, what's the greatest terrorist attack in American history? We would say it was in Oklahoma, but we would say it was the Murrah Federal Office Building, where Timothy McVeigh and his cohorts, bombed that federal office building. And in reality, in that same state, there was a bigger massacre, a bigger domestic terrorist thing, but because the people were Black, no one cared to talk about it. So when you talk about that, it doesn't change. It doesn't make anybody, it's truth. And then a person says, humans could do that? And then they say, I don't want to be a part of that anymore. And that's why they're so upset about history right now, because they're so upset about being given this Pollyanna version. Remember, think about the stuff our kids watch. They watch CSI where they see murders and all this stuff. They watch deep documentaries on Netflix and everything else. And then they go to school and get this so sanitized version of stuff. And we say, because they can't handle it. Man, you guys know, look at your kids' cell phone and the conversations they're having. They can handle it. But we've always been kind of like, hands off with everything. So it is important that we know history. We all need to know history. It's very important for us all to do our homework, because then when we become informed advocators. Because, so Pete, for you, I can do what I can do, but it takes white people to do the work with other white people. It takes white people to be courageous and stand in a room of just white people and say, we have to change, right? That's that type of moral courage that we need everyone in their respective spaces to exhibit. And that means also that one needs to be educated in that to be able to do it. Because otherwise, we have meme culture and people think that what they saw in a meme is truth. And they, you guys know, and then we repost them and they go, and then we have a whole climate of people responding to a meme and not to anything that deals with real history. So I think it's important for us all to continue to learn. Remember, if humans have done it, humans can do it. So that means for African Americans, Latinos, whites, everybody else, to know of courageous people like a John Brown, who was white, who stood up as a Christian minister and believed that he had to come in the same way that the Old Testament God came. And he led an attempt to have a violent revolution to end slavery, much in the same way that David went into that valley and fought, right? And to feel and to know that there's people like, Leah knows. So Leah and I worked together on this project called the Footsteps to Freedom Underground Railroad Study Tour, right? So for the past 20 years, her aunt and cousins and I have been leading people on these 8-day tours about the Underground Railroad. And when we're on that tour, you have, and the majority of people are not African-American who go on this tour. You start off on the first day and people begin to see something, and they're usually upset with me. We do these journals every night, and they'll turn them in, and they'll say, that dude is up there just spouting a whole bunch of liberal rhetoric, and they'll just start going in, right? They're just mad, and they're all in their silos. Second day, they get it from me, they get it from a docent at another place, they get it from something else. Next day, they get it from me, they get it from a museum exhibit, they get it from, next day, they have conversations. By the time we start moving, then everything starts to change. I had an individual who was a teacher in the high desert, and he said, Daniel, I always thought when blacks talked about white privilege, it was because they just didn't want to work. And this guy is telling me this with his vocal cords just screaming, and not screaming, but just because and he's crying. And he was the guy who at his school, most people would say he was the teacher that students could come to. He takes his students on trips in the Capitol and everything else, and the pictures are all multicultural and everything else. But in the deep-seated nature of his heart, he believed this. And he was just moaning and how he had to change. That process only goes about when we engage in dialogue, stay with it, open ourselves to knowing something historical, you know what I mean? And then just dealing with it, which is okay. And then you can come back and say, wow, I was robbed. I paid $250,000 for a college education and they never educated me, right? Which is what's gonna happen now, because these kids are gonna go back to these colleges and they're gonna look at their curriculum and they're gonna say, why don't I have this, and not just about blacks, but about Latinos, about women.
Yeah. Yeah.
And they're going to be reforming their curriculum based on the fact that they've been cheated. So we all have to go back and get what we lost because we never got it.
Yeah.
So it's okay.
And that's what I want to say to our young people. This history, the American history that we have received in the American public education system has been watered down. It has been I don't even know the best word to use. The point is, it's got to change. It's got to be more accurate, and you all have to fight for that. You all have to fight to hear and to know your history. Let me ask this question. First of all, Daniel, you're gonna have to give us some information about your Underground Railroad tour, because I have some people who, including myself, who want to do that. And so we want to be a part of that. So you have to give us some information about that. But I also want to see, and I've got educators on this call, and it's good to see my sister, my little sister, Nicole, who is an educator, and all these folks that I'm very honored to be in relationship with. Dr. Daniel, again, you all have questions for him that, and we're running out of time. I don't want to keep him too long. But are there other questions that you would like to ask Dr. Walker about this issue, about this topic, about this subject? And young people, again, we really want to hear from you. If you have something you want to ask, this is the time. So let me allow Dr. Walker a moment to answer some more questions.
Wait, and real quick, Leah's got all the information about the Underground Railroad study. Did we
Really?
Leah
Leah has all the information? Really?
Yeah.
Wow. Wow.
Yeah.
I know where to get the information.
Yeah.
I can get it to you, that's for sure.
Yeah.
At least we know where to get it now. All right, thank you.
Yeah.
Anyone, any questions? Any questions from our young people, from our adults? Greg, what are you hearing? What are you hearing that's piqued your interest at all? Is there anything that you're hearing from Dr. Walker and from this conversation? And I'm really honored to have you on this call, and I know that this is a new conversation for you, and I appreciate your putting yourself out there and even joining us this morning. What are you hearing that has piqued your interest as a city administrator, city official?
I appreciate the opportunity to be here. Thank you, everyone, enjoying this, if that's the right word to use. And I'm not sure that I equate any of this to my being an administrator, other than the concept that you and Pete have talked to me about, this idea of being an agent of change, and that everybody in their own environment, especially white people today, need to take, have accountability for, change in their own surroundings, right? What I've heard today that is encouraging is from Dr. Walker is, this message of hope. It's like you say, I mean, this has been going on since 1619, right, in this country, and it's been systemically ingrained in everything we do. But the message of hope, especially with young people, and I see it before all this happened. I mean, it takes an upwelling of social or civil unrest to create this. I mean, we saw with the Me Too movement, where 10 years ago, things that people just brushed aside now come to the fore because of what's going on. And in a real way, it seems that that's what's happening today. And so I'm encouraged to hear you talk about that, Dr. Walker, about, this movement today has white people involved, right? And sadly, that's what it's going to take to get some real change. But I see that hope with young people. I have nieces and nephews who are growing up in a society and a culture where it's okay to be gay. It's okay to have a girlfriend or a boyfriend if you're a girl or a boy. It's just accepted. The challenge is going to be mobilizing those people as we develop these young people into change agents, because I also see in my nieces and nephews sometimes some apathy, right? Where they accept all that, but then they just go on with their lives, and it's okay to be who you are. So my hope is, and from listening to you, that's going to happen now. I'm a little skeptical, but I've also learned from Pete that I need to educate myself. I listened to the podcast 1619 and was just floored by some of what I never, like you say, we have this system of history that teaches us from a textbook that is very, neatly tied up in a bow about what our experience has been. And unless we educate ourselves as white people, as everybody, we're not going to know the reality. And I never learned about the Tulsa Massacre. And I saw a piece on 60 Minutes where it was described as, everybody assumes that the first time we were attacked by air was 9/11, and that wasn't true. There was a Tulsa Massacre where white people took to their planes and firebombed buildings. And you don't learn that stuff in a textbook, and it's sad. But from my perspective, I need to educate. And I'm not a voracious reader. I'm a really busy administrator, and I'll make my excuses right here and now that I'm so busy that it's hard for me to sit down and take my leisure time to educate myself on something that typically isn't under my purview. Yeah. But I'm interested in doing it because, I don't know, the way the world is going right now, it's just, I see the hope and I hear the hope, and that's what I've always had this prevailing feeling that the good will prevail. And so over the last 4 years, I just haven't seen that happen. It's just like every step of the way, the bad guy, if you will, keeps getting away with doing bad stuff. And so my hope is that at this point in time, that's got to change. And it's been convenient for me as a white person to grow up in white privilege, whatever that looked like for me. I just hope that I have the courage that some of you're talking about, because it's really easy for anybody to just sit on their own comfort level and not do anything. But that's what I'm hearing. And I really appreciate being just listening. And I've already said too much. My whiteness has me feeling like maybe I should just be listening. But what I'm hearing you say is that's not good enough anymore. So anyway, thanks for the opportunity.
Oh, yeah. Go ahead, Dan.
No, Greg, I was going to say, that notion that we have that we need white people to talk. That's what we've been needing for 400 years, is for white people to be a part of a conversation. So we're not preaching to the pulpit. That, I can talk to Leah, she can talk to Nicole gonna talk to Latalia, she gonna talk to Bo, she gonna talk to, that's just keeping it right here. We need people to say, and I'm gonna throw this out to people of color. When people come into the space and just want to learn or ask a question, we have to make sure that we are also open to listening to help. You know, sometimes, you know, people will come in and they'll ask a question and then we'll jump all on somebody. And the person's just going, look, I'm just here because I'm trying to learn. Can you just help me? And it may sound ignorant what I just said, but I am ignorant about this. It just means I don't know. All right. And we've got to, because remember, every person, it's like evangelism. You know, every person who's converted to the faith, and now this faith about eradicating racism and the belief that we could be righteously indignant in this time period, that everybody who's converted can convert another person. And it's just like ministry. When you go into somebody's like, well, I don't want to hear nothing about that Jesus Christ stuff. You know what I mean? But what do? We stick with them, right? We go, okay, well, let me tell you what, if you're ever going to need something, I'm here to pray for you, right? And then the person keeps going. And sooner or later, you see them in the church house. And they're just sitting there and they're tentative. They're just listening. And they're in the back pew. And then sooner or later, it may be 3 months, it may be 6 months, they walk up to the front, right? And then we extend that hand of fellowship. And then they say something like, but I don't know. And then what do? We give them classes and we go to Bible study and we try to work people through so they can be the best Christian they can be, right? That same process is something that we need to do to get people to be the best human they can be outside of the issue or free of racism. And it's a process because, guys, this stuff is so ingrained, not just in our history, but our DNA, you know? And to rest it, to get it out, sometimes it's going to be that cathartic epiphany that kind of happens when, you know, boom, and you, oh my God, I had that day. And for other people, it's going to be this kind of cerebral, slow, thoughtful thing because they're trying to interrogate everything that's been their existence for their life. So that means they got to interrogate what my mother told me, and I love my mother, and she's been a great person to me. But are you telling me that my mother did, you know, said these things? You know, that, you know, I still want to go to the cookout. I still want to go to the Thanksgiving dinner, and we say things, and I don't want to bring up problems at Thanksgiving with my uncle or my, right? Right. All those things the person has to interrogate, and so they're going in a process because they got to get themselves ready to jump in the middle and in essence to be like one of those martyrs back in the old church where everything is coming at them, but they can still stand strong.
Yeah.
So we've got to undergird them. We got to be that cloud of witnesses that says to them, it's all right. There's a home for you, not just here, but in the other place, meaning in heaven, when we finally get this thing together. And you want to be on the right side of history. And you want to be the one who made the change, who converted, who became the zealot about this also. Not just our Christian faith, but our Christian faith is about love. And it says that there is no black, nor in essence, no Jew nor Gentile, no male nor female, no, right? In Christ Jesus. And so we can be that, and we need to make that a reality in our daily life, in our schools, and all the rest of those things. So I think that we as people of faith need to remember that even as we're righteously indignant, upset, virulent in our protest, but understand that we're still about the work of redemption, because that is what has to happen. We have to redeem the nation, and we're given that ultimate responsibility. And, you know, sometimes maybe, you know, I see when Greg said, you know, the guy keeps winning and we wonder how the good keeps winning. Remember, Jesus came at a time when Nebuchadnezzar was being was being a butthole. You know what I mean? And you had these kings out here being a certain way. And it was in those times it seemed like they were literally choking the life out of humanity, that God then sent the Savior.
So let me make sure there's no other questions. I have one last thing I want to ask, but I want to make sure that there's no questions from our.
Excuse me, that was Herod. Yeah, Herod. Sorry.
Any other questions?
I have a question.
Go ahead, Natalia.
So like Dr. Will said, I am a high school math teacher, and I want to know, what can I read to help my students, and what can I do to help inform my district about what's going on? We do have rules and regulations in place, so we are limited about what we can discuss in class, but how can I get to those leaders in order to help us enable those conversations in our classrooms?
First off, what district are you in?
I am in Newton County.
In
I'm
what?
in Georgia, Newton County.
Oh, in Georgia. Okay. I was like, that's in Southern California, Newton County. So I was like, that's a whole nother place I've never heard about. One is, even though you're limited in certain things, you still have the right as an employee to bring information, right? To suggest to your supervisors that there needs to be a professional development about certain things, and that there's a way in which, and you can, be able to find different individuals who can come there. And I know, what's the guy's name? He runs that academy in Atlanta. He's the white guy who wears, you know what I'm talking about.
I told you. Ron Clark.
Yeah. But people like that individual and others, and where you can talk about there's people that we can bring in that needs to help us with this. We, depending on what your demographic is, whether it's a huge African-American demographic or a small one. If it's small, we're saying we still need to be able to address these very real needs of these individuals who are the only one in the classroom or whatever else. If it's a larger African-American district, we're saying, how can we serve the most of these students the best that we can? We all have, so I think the issue is just saying to yourself, believing that you have the right to be an advocate. And that means to raise that question in meetings and to do your homework. I said, educate yourself, to be able to bring something to the table saying, this is what I'm suggesting. Here's this training that I think we need in this district to make sure that we are better at this. And I'm advocating for the school site and then maybe for the district. And then if there's blowback on it, I would always say that there's these millions of young people who are out in the streets who all you got to do is point them in the direction of where they need to go ahead and push. And that outside pressure to get some individual to finally say, I want to now look at these things. Remember, there's also the issue of in schools and school districts, where you spend your money, meaning where the school spends its money, what they spend their money on, how they spend that money. All those are other questions. The district office or the school board meeting are very important in those things. So I think the first thing is getting that notion that you have the power. You as an individual have the ability, the right to be able to bring these things up, do your homework to suggest the thing, and then take support from those individuals, whether it's the parent association, whether it's other like teachers that may be on your site and other sites within your district who say this is something that we can stand together on, right?
Yeah, don't try to do it alone. Don't try to do it alone. Find advocates, find those who will align with you. And I would say the same thing to our young people, Ari, Samara, Zion. You guys, and we said this last week, you guys, I am challenging you to be a voice on your school campus. And find the teachers. I know in Vista Marietta, I know Will Gaynor's there. He's aware, he knows what's going on that campus. You have to find the teachers, you have to find the advocates, you have to find those who are willing to stand with you to help you speak truth to power, to help you communicate to those who are the influencers, who make the policies. You should be down at the school board, know when the school board meet, put your question in, ask the hard questions, make the superintendent, if you're in Marietta, Paul Kelly, Pam Wilson, make those folks hear your voice, make them be involved in the change. And this is something we all have to do. Pete and I are talking about, okay, so what can we do? What can Greg do as city manager in Solana Beach, where I think it's less than 0% black, maybe 1% black in Solana Beach. I think he told me there were 4 blacks that was in the city. 10, I'm sorry, I got that wrong. It was 10.
I think it's 54. You're way underestimating it.
Yeah. So, I mean, the point is and this is not just something we do because blacks are present. And that's what I said to Greg. I said, listen, you don't make these changes. You don't begin these conversations because you have blacks in your employment or you have blacks in your city. You make these changes because we all need to be educated and we all need to be informed, not just because we have black people, right, in our area, but because this is a societal issue. And we all need to be educated and we all need to be informed. And so I want to know. What can I do as a pastor, and what can I do as a citizen to help educate? What books do you recommend that we read? Pete and I are reading Kendi's work and D'Angelo's work. But what do you say that we should be reading? We should be maybe even planning. I've talked about the possibility of doing a community academy on American history that's inclusive of African American journey from 1600 and beyond. And so, what do you say? And this is the last thing. What do you say we should be doing? We should be talking about. We should be reading. We should be watching.
So 2 books very quickly. Howard Zinn's A People's History of America. Okay, Howard Zinn, Zinn, A People's History of America. It's the most comprehensive, nuanced, truth-telling book. And as you talked about before, with regards to, does it matter if you have African Americans in your community or institution? This is about humanity.
Right.
This is about becoming more human. And one of the great things about Howard Zinn's book is, it talks about Native Americans. It talks about what happens when Irish immigrants come into America in a real way, so we can begin to see how genocide and racism, the 2 foundational pieces that he begins with the book, then begin to manifest themselves in, because if you can do this to one group of Americans, then you can do it to anybody, right?
Sure.
So whatever you allow to happen, that's why when we talk about even Black Lives Matter, when we're saying, because if you elevate this historical group that you have done these things, then everybody benefits, because if you don't want racism anymore, then Latinos benefit, then women benefit. Then if you don't want, those things. So that's one. Second book, it's a literature book. What's it? Book of essays by James Baldwin. It's called The Fire Next Time. It is written 50 years ago, but oh my God, it is still, and it's prophetic. And it warns, America. And it's, you guys know James Baldwin started off as a minister and then left the church because he said he don't know if the people really believed what they were saying. But he then becomes a public witness, a person who's out there speaking to truth to power individually. But that book encapsulates what it means to be Black. It encapsulates what the issue is for America, what the risk is if we don't solve the problem. The end passage says, and God gave Noah the rainbow sign, no more water, the fire next time. I think those 2 books, there are something for your head and for your spirit. And then from there, you can go kind of anywhere because they will open up things to you. What do we need to be doing? 1, listening, supporting, and searching our internal self for that bit of courage to stand up for the things that we know are wrong.
Yeah.
It's about stopping the conversation before somebody has it. It's about calling out words that are not correct in a conversation when people are saying them and you just go, well, that's just Bill.
Hey, could I just make a comment to Natalia's question and get your input on this, Dr. Walker? I happen to know a thing or two about labor negotiations. That's one of my jobs for many years. And I would imagine, Natalia, you're part of an organized teachers union. This is just an idea, but the mandatory subjects of bargaining are wages, hours, and working conditions. Well, if you feel like there's a working condition you're working under that might have a negative impact on the way you're doing your teaching, the labor union could be a potentially powerful ally if you have enough like-minded people in the union. Just an idea. I have a love-hate relationship personally with unions just because I have to negotiate with and against them. But I recognize their power. They definitely have power, and by and large, they look out for the best interest of their employees. By and large, I won't always say that that's always the case, but that might be a mechanism or a medium you can use to effectuate some sort of different outcome in your school. And I don't disagree or not. I'm just throwing it out there.
Yeah.
Oh, no, great. Because one of the things we need is it's like all the institutions that are at play. Case in point, when the flag went down in Mississippi, a huge part of that was the pressure from the NCAA saying that they weren't going to hold any, events in Mississippi anymore, and they used it. you know? So we got to use everything that we have to be able to push the pressure. And with Latalia, so are you NEA or AFT? Latalia?
I don't remember off the top of my head.
Okay. So I just was the keynote speaker at the NEA Social Justice Convention last year in Denver. And the chair and the secretary and the VP, all women, first time in NEA's history that the whole leadership is women. I mean, they're pushing the issue about social justice. And I know they just came up with something, even these $20 million that they put aside to push and help social justice issues, which just came out like 2 weeks ago or something like that. So they're looking at how can we, one, help leaders and help develop leaders and help them to get even their agenda. And if you, Latalia, if after this is over, if you either through through Reverend Dr. Pastor Wells, I can connect you with, I know the dude who's the social justice chair for NEA, and he's from Louisville, Kentucky. And just the notion of a bunch of templates and models they have about these issues, especially right now. And that would be a really good thing for you, because you can see what some other people have been doing, and you can be able to say to yourself, I'm not the only person. And going back to Pastor's point, even if you have to stand up alone in your district, you're not really alone, because to Greg's point, you are actually there with a 3 million person union behind you, and some other apparatuses in place to be able to amplify your words.
Wow, that's really good. That's really good. I hope that was helpful. Are there any questions before we close down?
I have a question.
Sure, go, Mara.
So, thinking back, like all of this started back 400 years ago, with slavery, and that ended really in 1865, which is why we celebrate Juneteenth. Then it went into Jim Crow, which started, I think, in the 1870s, if I'm not mistaken. And then in the midst of that, redlining was also happening, and I think that was in the 1930s. And all that didn't really end until the end of the 1960s, and then it was mass incarceration, which didn't really become known until the 1970s until now. And then all that history that I didn't learn throughout elementary school. Basically, in elementary school, it was just like, yeah, slavery was bad, but Abraham Lincoln fixed it. Then segregation was bad too, and they didn't really mention Malcolm X, but the one time I heard about him in history was in 5th grade, saying that he was someone who supported violence, and that he was just like, it was like he didn't have to do all that. Like they kind of made him the bad guy. And then they're talking about how Martin Luther King basically fixed racism just by marching and protesting, and then like the last racist on earth killed him, but he went to jail, and like that was it. And it kind of that really bothers me, because I really had to go out the way just to educate myself with all this information. And thinking about it, if I was to stand up to my teacher, which I've done like 2 times in 7th grade, whenever she stated something and I just like felt as if I had to say something, because it would be wrong of me not to stand up for my race. But another thing is I nearly got in trouble for it. So I'm thinking, is there any type of rule that protects students from standing up and using their voice?
Well, Dr. Walker, before you answer that, I gotta pop my collar a little bit.
Yeah.
That's my granddaughter. So I just want you to know that's Lloyd's. Very eloquent, very intelligent. She's an athlete. She's beautiful, and very well done, Samara. Very well said. Very well spoken. So I want to give that. Go ahead, Doctor.
Well, first off, that's just beautiful right there. And I love that from the very, very proud grandfather. And Samara, I'm first off, thank you for you going and getting your history. I mean, you choosing to be an advocate on your own. Your breakdown of the way in which it's told and has been told to you. The thing that I think young people need to be doing right now in terms of school, and what does it protect you? One, togetherness. And remember, you represent money. And you may not see it this way, but every day that you come to school, the school gets paid money for you being there. Okay, that's just a reality. So you pay their checks. You really do. We tend to not think about that way, but you really do. You're protected because of things like the First Amendment right to free speech. You're protected by certain things. Okay, I will say this: pushing to get, there's a movement afoot right now. Certain things have already happened. Ethnic studies as a required course at your high school, okay? So that, and now it's moved even from just ethnic studies, which is gonna be this conglomerate or whatever else, but now people saying that people need to have like Black history and Latino history, because if somebody just says ethnic studies, they could come in there and teach about German immigrants and all kinds of other stuff, and maybe even though it's an ethnic studies class, not get to the real issue. But I think pushing for one, it's called textbook adoption. So when they buy textbooks, you know, in one district that buys a textbook for all their history students, that's hundreds of thousands of dollars that they spend. And being able to push to get the right textbook adopted is one thing. Next, curriculum. So to be able to say, these are the classes that we need offered here. And there's a big movement that happened in Arizona around Chicano studies. And there's been a lot of legal cases and everything else, but I can actually make sure that I connect Pastor to some of those resources, because they literally, the people in Arizona even have like a template of how students and how parents can advocate for this, because they had started with Chicano studies and then the school board came and said no Chicano studies, and they fought this big case. And so they go around telling people about what your rights are and everything else, having lived it and gone through it. So it's textbook adoption, curriculum. And then the issue, like I said, you're an American citizen. You have a right to a First Amendment right to stand up and to say something. And if someone denies that right for you to be able to say something, you know, they're the ones who are, that's when you go back home and you tell your grandfather and you say, hey, what about this church? And they are silencing me. And that's when you stand up and more people come there and say, hey, we need this to change. And this person has a right to speak. Just like those, your grandfather talked about, those school board meetings, to go in there and speak. You have the ability and the right to do those things, but also, like I say, to tie it to things, tie it to textbook adoption. This is the book that we need to be using in our history classes, and this is a part of a change in the curriculum that we need. And the last thing, the third thing, training of the teachers. Because most teachers go through the whole system and have never taken a class that deals with, you know, with these subjects. It's terrible, but even their multicultural teaching certificate, you know, in California, we have 60% of the students or more are Latino, and most teachers have never taken a class about Latino history. Even though the vast majority of their students are Latinos and they don't know anything about Mexican American or Latino history. So training, pushing that the teachers, and state mandates what we call professional development for teachers. So you being able to say they need to go and learn this because they need to, because they need a sensitivity, they need to be educated. So it's textbooks, it's curriculum, and teacher training. And so you as a young person can push for those things. And I'm telling you, they will be blown away by your articulation of those things and the fact that you have a game plan of what you want the schools to do.
Quick comment, Dr. Walker, quick comment, and that would be, I fully understand the dynamic between you, Samara, right? Samara, and for Greg's benefit, Samara, are you 14?
Yes.
Yeah, she's a 14-year-old young woman, and I love that, Samara. But I fully understand the dynamic of your relationship with your teacher and how your teacher has a lot to do with your success in that classroom. And Dr. Walker, you might agree with me that developing a contentious relationship with your teacher can be very difficult, can create a lot of difficulties. However, you're not interested in developing a contentious relationship with anybody, Samara. You're interested in educating and bringing education, bringing justice and fairness and equity into the discussion around education, and race into the discussion around education, and into accurate historical context and accurate historical teaching. When you you can take this right to, Greg, how many minutes do people get down at city council to talk? Any city council meeting, how many minutes do they get?
3 minutes typically.
3 minutes. 3 minutes. Each individual gets 3 minutes, Samara. And I bet it's the same thing at a school board meeting. And my guess is that I don't think you spoke for 3 minutes, maybe just shy of 3 minutes, just a few minutes ago, and you said a boatload. And if you put together 3 minutes at a school board meeting, where you essentially laid out for them what you're missing, and not only laid out for them what you're missing, but also brought, I'm sure, and Dr. Walker, I think, brought this to our attention, that there are a number of movements around the country to bring this education to the school districts. And there's got to be books available that, I mean, he just told us about one of them that could be included in the curriculum, and to bring that information. When we bring a problem, those of us who have been leaders and managers, when somebody's bringing us a problem, we like it when they bring us solutions too. Yeah. But don't be surprised, Samara, when they ask you, hey, would you be willing to be on the committee? Would you be willing to be the chair of that committee to help us with that? Because they need help and they need energy. So where I can understand where you may not want to take this fight to your classroom, or take this conversation in your classroom, and it can be done tactically. And I think what you've told us that you're doing that, it can be done tactically. But at the school board, yeah, you represent income for them. Dr. Walker brings up an outstanding point, is that you represent income for them, and remind them of that. Remind them of that. You can do the math and figure out how much income you represent for them on an annual basis. And bring some friends, and then point around the room and say, yeah, and there's another and another and another. And now we amount to about now we're in 6 figures. We're over 100,000 now.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, take that.
And to say something like, my parents have choices, and we can go to another district that does have the type of curriculum and the type of training and the type of things that we actually want and need, you know?
So you can take it to the policymakers tomorrow.
Yeah, yeah. One other thing I'll just throw out there real quick. So my daughter had, and I know this issue about like what happens, the contentious relationship in the class. So this is a very famous photo from Birmingham Children's March 1963, where it's a dog being sicked on a private individual and the police there. And the teacher was doing this assignment, which was like, I'll show you the picture, and then people kind of talk about whatever it is, what you think it is. And then at the end of the class, we'll kind of talk about what it was. And the teacher front loaded it with all this stuff about, did the man rob someone? The dog is being sicked on. Did the man rob someone? Was he a criminal? Had he shot someone? All these negative kind of lead-ins about the thing. My daughter is like, excuse me, and she understood what the picture was, but she was just like, that's a wrong way to even introduce it if we're supposed to be just looking at a picture and then coming over our interpretation, for you to lead people down this criminalistic, all the rest of this stuff. Her and the teacher got into it, and my daughter was just like, I'm sorry, but I just think that was wrong. They had to bring me into it, I mean, as the father, and I just, when I said I listened to my daughter, and then I supported her. And in the end, she ended up having to get out of that classroom. She went to a different classroom. She went to a different classroom because the person was so upset that she had the nerve to question her teaching, that it seemed very obvious that there was going to be, for the rest of the semester, problems with grading and questioning grades and all that stuff. And so she moved out of that classroom. But I am so happy that my daughter did what she did. And you guys may know, so my daughter goes to Syracuse University. And last year they had this huge issue with all this racist stuff going on. You guys may have known, all in the national news, everything else. My daughter was one of the people standing up at that time. And I know it's because I supported her when she was in 11th grade, when she stood up at her high school. And now I could see her on a national stage standing up at Syracuse and getting them to actually push for more hires, push for training, push for all the rest of those things. And I was just the proudest father in the world when that happened. But I'm not to say that when she did that, it didn't create some consternation. It didn't create conflict. It had to be a process that we had to go through. I'm just saying, Samara, that be ready for those things. But I'm telling you, on the other end, it's worth it, because if it wasn't for those kids in 1963 standing up in Birmingham, they are the ones that ended segregation in Birmingham. It wasn't Martin Luther King's letter from a Birmingham jail. It was the Children's March that ended that.
Yes. Pop your collar, Daniel. Pop your collar. Listen, you guys have been awesome today. Dr. Walker, if you would put your contact information in the chat box and your address, I want to send you a gift just to say thank you for your wisdom, for your knowledge, for your time, for your participation. You're a good friend. I thank God for you. And if I can get that information from Leah on the Underground Railroad, we'll try to make that. We'll try to make that trip. Maybe Greg and Pete and Nicole and some of these other folks might want to go with us to be a part of that tour. But I definitely want to be a part of that. Anything else anybody want to say to Dr. Walker as we prepare to give the benediction? Anybody?
Thank you for taking the time to talk to us.
Thank you for being attentive and listening and all this stuff, you guys. It's a lot, and I thank you. I thank Reverend Pastor Dr. See you, Leah.
I'm contacting Paulette right now.
All right.
Well, if you want that information, as soon as I get it from Leah, I'll pass it on to all of you.
Leah's mad at me right now. She's like, how did I get in this? Because Leah's aunt is the one who started the whole thing.
Yeah. She
And Leah's been on the trip before and all that.
Hey, listen,
we'll be a coordinator.
We'll be on again next Sunday at 10 o'clock. I've got some young men that I want to introduce you about their journey from incarceration to leadership. I've got a young man who was teacher of the year in LA School District. He was a gang member in the jungle of Los Angeles. He was a member of my church some years ago, and want to have him in this conversation. So we're going to keep doing this as long as you keep showing up. If I show up one Sunday and I'm by myself, I'll sign off finally. But so grateful. Daniel, you are awesome. Thank you so much for taking the time. I'm blessed to know you and consider you a friend. Anyone else? If not, blessings to you. Have a great Sunday, and we'll see you next week.
Peace, everybody.
Peace, everybody. Thank you, guys.
All right.
Pretty good, huh, Pete?
Wow.
Yeah.
Well, I sent Greg a text during this. I said, Dr. Daniel Walker, SDSU, sounds like a good contact for training guidance if needed, desired. He'd be a good person to be in dialogue with for Greg. Local university. He just brings so much to that discussion and that table. And he's been in that milieu, that circle, and that dialogue for decades. Mm-hmm. So he, person like that, good contact for Greg, and good for him for showing up.
Yeah,
proud of him.
He's doing some good stuff. Hey man, thanks again. Thank you for last night. Kat and I had a blast. So good to be with you guys, man. Can't wait to do it again.
Always. So I'm going to go down and see whether or not there's a van in an alley.
Hey, call me if you need cover. I'm not too far.
Take care.
All right, buddy. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.